All right, so we declared three components, right? The login, the register, and the profile. And we'd like to start navigating between them, but as a result of having successfully logged in or of having provided the right credentials and whatnot. So let's take a look at that. So for that, we're going to have to bring in the form modules. The forms module, which is, as we mentioned yesterday, it is not loaded automatically, right? You have to separately load it. So we'll do that. Let's bring that in. In the app modules right here, we'll we'll import the forms module. There it is, right? And we'll load it into the imports right here. So the browser module, the forms module. Okay, now we have forms. We can do ng module, ng model, right? We can handle input fields, drop downs, checkboxes, radio buttons, all those form components. Okay, so let's first start with the login page. What we'd like to be able to do is be able to type the correct username, password, and when we click on login, we can check to see if it's the username and password that we're expecting. Right? If it is, we're going to programmatically navigate to the profile. Right? We could have a navigation between the various components. Like for instance, from the login, it's fine if I go to it's fine if I do router link to register, sign up. Okay, so that if I'm in the login page, I can click on sign up. I can navigate to the register page, which is fine, right? I don't need any logic for that. You can always navigate between these two. Same thing if I'm in the register. I should be able to just navigate to login. Login or sign in. So from these two, from register I can go to login, and from login I can go to register. No need for logic here. I don't need to run any logic. But if I click on this button, the login, right? I should check something before I navigate to the profile page. Yes, right. So let's see how we can do that. Let's see. Right. So first of all, we're going to have to be able to capture the username and password in the controller. Right. So to do that, we're going to declare a couple of variables in the view. Right, we're going to, in the login, we're going to tie these input fields to a model using the ng model directive. I'm going to tie it to a variable called username. And we'll do the same thing with password. Looks like it doesn't see my ng model username. Actually works. It is declaring the variable, so the IDE is wrong because it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. Notice what I did here, right? I declared a variable. I declared a local variable username, and I'm referring to it in plain text. Right? I'm referring to it using the double mustache syntax here of referring to that variable and rendering it right in line with the rest of the content. And so there it is. So everywhere where that content changes, that is rendered. So for instance, if I put it here in the login, username, everywhere where username is referred to, right, it would render. Okay, so it notifies any references to this variable. It's notified and re-updates the DOM accordingly. Make sense? Right, it's pretty nice, without having to maintain state, without having to update state or any of that. Right? It's although it's less optimal than React. React is very leery on updating the DOM. right? It always does a comparison between the current state and the old state. If there's any changes, then it updates the DOM, right? It's much more optimal. Here, Angular is a little more inefficient, but perhaps might be a little bit easier. The concept might be a little bit easier. Anyway, so let's put it back in login, and I don't need this username. So all right, so I have this username and password, and on the button I could notify my controller, say, hey, somebody's trying to log in. So I can do a click and say login, and I can pass as an argument my username and password, my local variables of username and password, right? And then notify the my controller. I can notify my controller in a function also called login, right? That can take as argument username and password, right? And here we can do console log username and password. Okay. All right. So let's try that out, and we can look at we can inspect this, and maybe put this on the right-hand side. Console. All right. So if we type Alice and click on login, notice that it prints Alice and Alice on the console. Yes? So here in that function is where we could do a couple things, right? We could test right here on the client and see if the username and password is what we would expect. More typically what we would do is that we would go out to the server. Right? We go out to the server, here's the username and password, maybe even encrypted so that the password, you can't see it in plain text. Right? And the server would then query their database and say, is this a real user? If there is, right, it would respond successfully or failed or whatnot. Yes? And depending on that logic, we would decide to programmatically navigate to profile or not, right? And notify, sorry, I don't know who you are. Okay. So let's try it. And let's try that out. We can click login. What I did here is that in the slides, I declared variables, username and password. That's another way of doing it, right? Here I'm passing it, right? I'm passing it as arguments. I'm passing them as arguments, or, right, the component. Remember, any variable that I declare here in the view is also available in the container in the component, in the controller, right? So if I declare here any variable username, I can declare also that it's the correct type, it's a string, and password is also a string. The typing is optional. So now that they're available, locally in the entire class, I don't really need to pass the username and password, right? Since I have it as class variables. But I prefer to pass as arguments. Since you're controlling exactly what the communication is between the view and the controller, I think that's a little better. All right. Okay. Excellent. So let's see what logic we could do. What we're going to do is that we're going to programmatically navigate. We're going to programmatically navigate somewhere. Okay. In particular, we want to navigate perhaps to the profile. Yes. We navigate to the profile. And to do that, right, we're going to use the navigate function of a library in the router library. Right? The router library has all sorts of operations that allow you to navigate backwards and forwards and jump anywhere you want in the path. Right? We can look at the history. There's all sorts of everything that has to do with manipulating the URL. Right? Any parameters that might be passed along there, and parse any parameters in there, query strings, you name it, right? Everything's in there. In particular, it has a function called navigate, right? That's going to allow us to, like the name says, navigate to a particular route. So to use the router library, we're going to use this technique here that it's somewhat inspired by Java's injection mechanism, right? In Java, you say, auto-wire, right? Auto-wired, and then all these services are available to you, right? You can ask for a repository. You can ask for network connections and whatnot, right? And that's inversion of control in Java, right? So and even in Java, you can do it two ways, right? You can either do the auto-wire mechanism, yes, or you can declare a constructor where you ask for a particular instance, right? And it will be auto-wired by calling your constructor, and it will pass the instance to your constructor, yes, right? I think the auto-wired mechanism is a little more it's a little more elegant, right? In Angular, you have something similar. In Angular, you have also injection, but it's through the constructor. It's through the constructor. You can ask for instances of things, right? And the infrastructure will instantiate and call your constructor with whatever you ask for. Right? So you're asking here for a variable of type router. Okay, of type router. So the infrastructure, the Angular infrastructure, will call you when it instantiates you, will inject you an instance of the router. Right? We're just declaring it up here. Right? Once we have that, once we have it in the constructor, you can then use that variable as if it were a local class variable. Right? For instance, you can say this dot router, whatever you called it, right, in your local variable. Again, all these libraries are copying ideas that have been around for decades, on the enterprise side, in Java, .NET. These ideas have been there for a while. So now they're making their way onto the client development. All right, so let's see. In the constructor, we're going to ask for the router. We're going to import it. There it is. We're imported it. And now login can do things such as this.router.navigate. And now we can navigate. We can say, where do you want to go? Right? Well, we could go to the register page. Probably not. That's not what we want. We'll probably go. Let's try the profile page. So the profile page, I believe it was profile. I believe the commands actually it's an array. Navigate takes an array. Navigate takes an array of paths. You can build a path programmatically as an array of strings. Right? Also because typically when you're navigating to a path, usually that path has parameters, has path variables, has all sorts of things that you want to put together and build up the path. Right? So usually we use an array to do that. So here's the array, and the array right now only has one single path, and it's the profile path. So /profile. All right, so let's try doing that. If we go back and notice that now if we click on login, it navigates to the profile page. Yes? Notice that we did it programmatically. Here we're saying, yep, we know who Alice is. We're going to navigate. I guess you could do it. You could say if username is equal to Alice, and password is equal to Alice. Then we navigate. Okay. If not, then we don't navigate. Right. So let's try that. So let's go back to the login. Make this a little smaller. So if it's whatever and I log in, I don't go anywhere, right? But if I click Alice and Alice, then I navigate to the profile page. Make sense? Okay. Notice that the URL up above is changing, right? It is changing. So we could perhaps pass around perhaps the user's ID, right? And based on that ID, perhaps show the profile for that particular person. Right, maybe go out to a server, use the ID to fetch the user's information, and then dynamically, render that information here. Yes. Now, obviously, we're doing password validation here on the client Obviously, you wouldn't do that on the client, right? All this would be done on the server, right? That would be the appropriate thing to do on the server. But nevertheless, it works with for the example. Everybody okay? All right, navigating programmatically. All right, so let's now introduce the notion of services.